Filthy animals like you don't belong here. The words exploded like gunfire on the marble steps of the Philadelphia Federal Courthouse, leaving the entire crowd frozen in shock. And yes, those words came from a police officer sworn to protect justice. Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and like to help us share more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. Judge Olivia Grant, 48 years old, admired and respected by her peers, had spent more than 2 decades serving as one of Philadelphia's most trusted federal judges. But on this day, she wasn't wearing her robe. There was no nameplate, no gavel, no visible authority, just a tailored gray suit, a leather satchel filled with case files, and the calm confidence of a woman who had built her career on fairness and integrity. As she approached the courthouse steps, Officer Nathan Wheeler stood at the top, leaning against the railing with arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the morning crowd. 17 years on the force had given him power, but also arrogance, the kind that grows when you've learned you can act without consequences. He spotted Olivia moving purposefully through the crowd and instantly decided she didn't belong. To him, she was just another suspicious figure. His jaw tightened, and his hand rested instinctively near his belt as he stepped forward. "ID," he barked, his voice harsh and commanding, cutting through the hum of the busy morning like a blade. Olivia slowed, meeting his stare with quiet composure. "I'm Judge Olivia Grant," she said evenly. "I work here. My credentials are right. She never got to finish. Without warning." Wheeler's open palm cracked across her face so hard that her head whipped to the side. The sharp slap echoed off the marble columns like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from bystanders. A young woman screamed. Olivia's leather satchel slipped from her shoulder and crashed onto the steps, spilling legal briefs across the ground like scattered feathers. Wheeler grabbed her arm roughly, twisting it behind her back until she winced in pain. "You don't belong here. Filth," he growled through clenched teeth as he forced her into handcuffs, the metal biting into her wrists with a sharp click. Pain flared up her shoulders, but Olivia's face remained calm, her breathing controlled, her gaze unshaken. Inside, though, an old wound was bleeding. Memories flooded back. Her father profiled and humiliated in the 80s. Her teenage nephew arrested at 14 for walking home from school. Her own battles against a system she'd spent her entire life trying to reform. She had seen prejudice before, but never like this. And now, it wasn't just a stranger facing injustice. It was her. Officer Wheeler didn't care. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pause to think. He saw dark skin, an unfamiliar face, and assumed guilt. 2 other officers approached, Benjamin Cole, stocky with a crooked smirk, and Lauren Holt, tall and sharp-eyed, her silence speaking volumes. "Got ourselves another trespasser," Cole muttered under his breath, shaking his head with mock disbelief. Holt glanced at Olivia's satchel, at the papers fluttering in the wind, then quickly looked away. The crowd began to murmur. Phones came up, cameras clicked, voices whispered. A few people gasped when they noticed the bronze plaque above the courthouse entrance engraved with the words, "The Honorable Olivia T. Grant, Presiding Judge," her name, her courtroom, her authority. And yet, in this moment, none of it mattered. Olivia forced herself to stay silent. Every fiber of her being wanted to speak, to scream, to tell them who she was. But she didn't. Not yet. She had prosecuted corrupt officers before. She knew exactly how this game worked. Every second she stayed quiet. Wheeler dug his own grave deeper, inside his mind. Wheeler felt untouchable. 17 years of complaints, all dismissed, had taught him that the system was on his side. His arrogance wasn't born overnight. It was built case by case, protected by colleagues, reinforced by supervisors who looked the other way. To him, Olivia was just another problem to control. But beneath that swagger, there was insecurity, the kind born from a childhood where he'd felt powerless and invisible. This was how he made sure no one ever made him feel small again. As Wheeler dragged Olivia up the steps, the handcuffs cutting into her skin, the air was thick with tension. People recorded from every angle. Some whispered her name, recognizing her, but no one dared intervene. Olivia's eyes fixed on one young clerk standing near the doorway, Jasmine Carter, 25, holding a stack of files. Jasmine frowned, confusion etched across her face. She had seen Judge Grant dozens of times in the courthouse halls. Why was she in cuffs? Something wasn't right. Olivia caught her eye and gave the smallest nod. A silent message. Wait. Watch. Remember this. Inside. Olivia's mind was a storm. She wasn't thinking about pain anymore. She was planning, calculating. Every movement Wheeler made, every word he spat, every phone lifted by bystanders. It was all evidence. She thought of the courthouse security cameras she knew were rolling. The body cam footage Wheeler would later claim had malfunctioned. The dozens of witnesses now whispering her name. Justice would come. Not today, but soon. Wheeler, unaware of the tidal wave about to crash down on him, shoved her through the courthouse doors and barked at the clerk behind security, processing her, trespassing, possible stolen documents. Hold her! The clerk's eyebrows shot up but said nothing. Olivia stayed silent, every muscle locked in control. But deep inside, a fire was building. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, soft but firm, the words she had lived by since childhood. Justice is your shield, but truth is your sword. And Olivia Grant was about to draw her sword inside the Philadelphia Federal Courthouse. The air was thick with tension, the weight of silence pressing down like a storm ready to break. Olivia sat at the defendant's table, wrists still bound, the faint bruise on her cheek beginning to bloom under the harsh fluorescent lights. Across the room stood Officer Nathan Wheeler, confident, composed, and ready to perform. Judge Henry Sullivan, a temporary replacement covering morning hearings, leaned forward slightly on the bench, scanning the room with impatience. He had no idea who Olivia truly was. Wheeler cleared his throat, adopting a rehearsed expression of concern. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and authoritative. This woman was behaving erratically on the courthouse steps. She refused to show identification, carried a satchel full of legal documents, likely stolen, and became aggressive when approached. His words flowed like a script he'd recited 100 times, polished by years of manipulating the system that shielded him. Every pause, every sigh, every carefully chosen phrase was designed to sound reasonable, even heroic. Officer Benjamin Cole and Officer Lauren Holt sat nearby, ready to support his lies. "That's correct," Cole said, nodding in agreement when prompted, his tone casual, practiced, and cold. Holt's voice was quieter, but her testimony matched Wheeler's perfectly, word for word, as though memorized. Prosecutor Abigail Foster, sharp, focused, and efficient, stood at her table, flipping through paperwork as she built her case based entirely on their statements. She didn't question Wheeler. She didn't even glance Olivia's way. To her, this was routine. Another case. Another trespasser. Olivia sat motionless, her face calm, her gaze steady, but inside her mind, 1,000 calculations were racing. Every word Wheeler spoke, she logged. Every contradiction, every overreach, every glance exchanged between him and his fellow officers. She stored it all away. She had spent years dismantling cases like this from the bench, exposing misconduct brick by brick. But today, she was forced to endure it from the other side. Jasmine Carter, the young court clerk seated near the bench, couldn't hide her unease. Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard as she took down the testimony. Her brows furrowed. She had seen Judge Olivia Grant in these halls for months, walking with quiet authority, exchanging kind words with staff, carrying herself with dignity. None of this made sense. Why would a federal judge be sitting cuffed at the defendant's table, accused of trespassing in her own courthouse? Jasmine's eyes flickered toward Olivia, searching for answers. But Olivia gave nothing away. Across the gallery, whispers rippled among the handful of early morning attendees. Some recognized her, others thought they did. A few were already recording discreetly on their phones, sensing that something about this hearing wasn't right. Judge Sullivan, unaware of the storm brewing, leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "So, Officer Wheeler," he said slowly, "to be clear, you're saying this woman refused to comply with a lawful order?" Wheeler straightened, his voice firm. "Yes, Your Honor. I requested identification several times, and she refused. She became hostile and attempted to conceal documents we believe are stolen from the clerk's office." Abigail Foster nodded sharply, adding, "Based on their statements, the state recommends holding her until we can verify her identity and investigate the origin of those documents." A low murmur ran through the gallery at her words. Olivia felt it, the weight of suspicion, the sting of humiliation, the bitter taste of injustice. But she didn't flinch. She sat tall, her shoulders squared, her eyes forward, her silence deliberate. She knew better than anyone that patience could be more powerful than rage. Across the aisle, Wheeler cast her a quick, smug glance, the kind of look that said, "I've won this." He had no idea how wrong he was, behind that calm exterior. Olivia's mind was moving with precision. She remembered every security camera angle around the courthouse steps, every hallway camera leading to the defendant's table, and she knew every second of it had been recorded. She also knew something Wheeler had clearly forgotten. Since last year's reforms, every Philadelphia officer's body cam automatically uploaded footage to a secure federal server in real time, preventing deletion or tampering. No malfunctions, no excuses. Every slap, every insult, every moment of abuse was already preserved in the cloud, and she would use it. For now. Though. She watched, listened, waited. Wheeler continued his testimony, his voice unwavering. "She became confrontational," he said, gesturing toward Olivia without looking directly at her. "At one point, I feared for public safety and had no choice but to restrain her," Cole added. "That's right, Your Honor." She was loud, uncooperative, disturbing the peace. Holt nodded on cue, repeating, "We followed standard procedure. The performance was flawless, too flawless. It was synchronized, rehearsed, and predictable. But Judge Sullivan didn't see it. Not yet." Olivia's silence, however, was making Wheeler nervous. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't protesting. She wasn't saying anything at all. Every instinct in him expected outrage, tears, fear, some sign that he had control. Instead, he was met with stillness. That stillness unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Jasmine Carter glanced up from her keyboard again, her young face pale with realization. She had just pulled up Olivia's name in the court system quietly, away from the other's eyes, and what she found made her heart race. Judge Olivia T. Grant, presiding federal judge. The very courtroom they sat in bore her name on a plaque outside the door. Yet the officers accusing her of trespassing hadn't noticed, or hadn't cared. Jasmine's fingers trembled slightly as she typed, but she said nothing. She wanted to see what Olivia would do. Judge Sullivan finally turned to Olivia, his tone stern. "Ma'am, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Olivia raised her head slowly, her calm gaze locking onto Wheeler. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to speak, but she didn't. Not yet. No, Your Honor, she said softly, her voice steady, deliberate. Not at this time. Wheeler's smirk returned, his confidence bolstered by her restraint. He thought her silence meant surrender, but Olivia wasn't silent because she was powerless. She was silent because she knew she was holding the winning hand, and the right moment hadn't come yet. Abigail Foster closed her folder, convinced the case was straightforward. The state recommends a short recess. Your Honor, to verify her identity and evidence. Sullivan nodded, tapping his gavel lightly. Court is in recess for 20 minutes. Wheeler leaned against the rail, arms crossed, whispering something to Cole that made both men chuckle. Olivia lowered her eyes to the table, her hands still cuffed, but her mind was razor sharp. She was already 10 steps ahead, already planning exactly how she would dismantle every single lie spoken in this room. As the bailiff escorted her to a holding room, Jasmine's gaze followed her, the question unspoken but clear. What are you going to do? Olivia didn't answer, but in her heart, she knew. This wasn't over. It hadn't even started. The heavy door of the holding room slammed shut behind her, leaving Judge Olivia Grant alone in silence, the faint hum of the courthouse air vents the only sound breaking through. Her wrists still ached from the tight cuffs, and the bruise on her cheek throbbed faintly. But her mind was sharper than ever. She had endured humiliation on the courthouse steps, false accusations in the courtroom, and now she sat here, in the very building where her name was etched on plaques and carved into legal history, treated like a criminal. Seconds later, the door creaked open and Bailiff Marcus Tate stepped inside, his face pale, his voice trembling. Judge Grant, I didn't realize, he whispered, glancing nervously at the hallway to ensure no one was listening. Olivia met his eyes, calm but firm, her voice low and measured. Marcus, listen to me carefully, she said, her tone carrying the weight of quiet authority. I need you to go to my office right now. Bring me my judicial robes and my gavel, the mahogany one, engraved with "Truth Prevails." Marcus hesitated for half a second, fear flashing in his eyes. Judge, if Wheeler sees me. Olivia leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. Marcus, trust me. Do it. He swallowed hard, nodded, and slipped out, his steps quick and deliberate. Olivia took a deep breath, pulling her phone discreetly from her jacket pocket before anyone noticed. She dialed a secure line, and within seconds, the calm but commanding voice of Chief Judge Charlotte Ramsey answered, Olivia, where are you? I've been hearing whispers. Olivia cut her off gently but firmly. Charlotte, listen. Wheeler assaulted me on the courthouse steps. I need you to secure every second of security footage from 8:30 to 9 a.m. Pull the uploads from the body cams, too. Every angle, every file. No one touches it. No one edits it. A beat of silence. Then Charlotte's voice hardened. Consider it done? And Olivia, are you okay? Olivia's voice softened slightly. Just for a moment. I'm fine. Charlotte, but this ends today. She ended the call, her jaw tightening as she slipped the phone back into her pocket. Every second mattered now. Every move had to be precise. Wheeler thought he had stripped her of her power. But he didn't understand. Olivia wasn't just a judge. She was the system he thought he could manipulate. Outside. Marcus Tate hurried through the corridors, his heart pounding as he retrieved Olivia's robes and gavel from her office. He moved quickly, hiding them beneath a plain courthouse storage bag to avoid drawing attention. Back in the holding room. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself to steady her breathing. Images of her father flashed through her mind. The day he was stopped by police for fitting a description. The humiliation in his voice when he told the story at dinner. She remembered her nephew Jamal's terrified face when he was arrested at 14 for walking home through a wealthy neighborhood. And now, here she was, a federal judge, sitting in cuffs because a police officer decided her skin color made her suspicious. But Olivia wasn't broken. She wasn't angry. She was focused. Her grandmother's voice returned like a whisper. Justice is your shield, but truth is your sword. And today, she would wield that sword. The door opened again, and Marcus slipped inside, closing it quickly behind him, without a word. He set the storage bag on the table and stepped back. Olivia reached inside and pulled out her black silk judicial robes, the fabric smooth beneath her fingertips, heavy with meaning. As she draped them across her lap, she felt the shift, the weight of her authority settling back into place like armor. Then she lifted the polished mahogany gavel, tracing the engraved words, "Truth prevails," with her thumb. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. "Thank you, Marcus," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "From this moment on, not a word to anyone." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Your Honor." Olivia gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before standing, her posture straight, her resolve unshakable. For the first time since Wheeler slapped her on those courthouse steps, she felt the balance of power begin to shift. Meanwhile, just outside the holding room, Officer Wheeler leaned against a marble column, smirking as he spoke quietly with Officers Cole and Holt. "She's probably begging for a deal in there," he scoffed, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Once this is over, she'll think twice before showing up here without ID." Cole chuckled darkly, but Holt's expression flickered with unease. Deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Across the hall, Jasmine Carter, the young court clerk, approached slowly, her voice low as she addressed Marcus on his return. "Is it true?" she whispered, her hands clutching a stack of files. "That's Judge Grant?" Marcus hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Keep it to yourself for now," he murmured. "But yes, and she's not done yet." Jasmine's eyes widened, her heart pounding as she returned to her desk, unable to shake the weight of what she'd just learned, back inside the holding room. Olivia checked her reflection briefly in the small mirror embedded in the wall. The faint bruise on her cheek stood out, but she didn't hide it. She wanted the world to see it. She wanted everyone in that courtroom to know exactly what Wheeler had done. Outside, the 20-minute recess was winding down, and the hum of conversation grew louder as people filled the gallery again. Phones buzzed as rumors spread like wildfire, a high-profile judge in custody, accusations flying, whispers of misconduct and body cam footage surfacing. The tension was thick, electrifying, ready to ignite. Olivia placed her robes carefully over her arm, the gavel tucked discreetly into her satchel. Marcus positioned himself just outside her door, ready to escort her back into the courtroom, his face a mask of professionalism hiding his racing heartbeat. As they began walking down the hallway, Olivia's heels clicked softly against the marble floor, each step deliberate, steady, unyielding. She passed Wheeler and his officers without a glance, her silence louder than any words could have been. Wheeler smirked, mistaking her composure for defeat, unaware that the ground beneath his feet was already crumbling. The bailiff called out to the courtroom, "All rise!" as the doors swung open. But Olivia didn't take her seat at the defendant's table this time. Not yet. That moment was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything. Every camera was rolling, every phone pointed, every breath in the room held as the storm gathered. Wheeler still thought he owned the narrative. He didn't know that Olivia had already seized control of it. He didn't know that every lie he'd told, every insult he'd spat, every violent act he'd committed was already preserved, immutable, undeniable. And soon, the world would see the truth. The recess was over. But for Officer Wheeler, the countdown had just begun. The courtroom buzzed softly as the 20-minute recess ended. the gallery filling with low whispers and restless anticipation. Rumors had spread like wildfire through the courthouse halls. A mysterious defendant, a heated confrontation on the marble steps, and something about body cam footage being locked down. No one knew the truth. Not yet. Then the double doors swung open, and silence rippled through the room as Judge Olivia Grant stepped inside. No longer in her gray-tailored suit, but in the flowing black judicial robes that carried the weight of authority. Her polished mahogany gavel rested firmly in her hand, engraved with the words, "Truth prevails," its meaning sharper now than ever before. Officer Wheeler leaned casually against the railing, still smirking, whispering something to Cole under his breath. He hadn't noticed the robe. He hadn't understood the shift. But the bailiff did. Marcus Tate stepped forward, his voice booming across the room with deliberate force. All rise. The Honorable Judge Olivia T. Grant, presiding. The words cracked through the silence like lightning striking dry earth. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Prosecutor Abigail Foster froze mid-step, papers clutched tightly in her hands. Jasmine Carter, the young court clerk, dropped her pen onto the desk, her wide eyes locking on Olivia in stunned recognition. Judge Henry Sullivan's jaw went slack, his gavel halfway raised in confusion as he stammered. I didn't. Officer Wheeler blinked, his smirk faltering as if his brain refused to process what he was hearing. Olivia moved with steady, deliberate grace, ascending the 3 marble steps toward the bench. Each click of her heels echoed like a drumbeat of authority. Without hesitation, she placed her gavel on the polished oak surface and took her seat, her posture regal, her expression unreadable, her silence heavier than any words could be. Then she lifted her gaze, locking eyes with Wheeler for the first time since the slap on the courthouse steps. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and sharp enough to cut steel. "Officer Wheeler," she began, her tone measured, deliberate, carrying across every corner of the courtroom. "You testified under oath that I trespassed, that I resisted, that I attempted to conceal stolen documents. Is that correct?" Wheeler's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his voice cracking slightly when he answered, "Yes, Your Honor." Olivia's eyebrows lifted just enough to betray the faintest trace of irony. "Your Honor," she repeated softly, letting the title hang in the air like a trap snapping shut. A ripple of realization moved through the gallery as the truth began to land. Wheeler shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Cole and Holt for support, but they looked away, without breaking eye contact. Olivia gestured toward the large courtroom monitor. "Let us review the evidence," she said evenly. Marcus Tate, already prepared, dimmed the lights as the high-definition security footage from the courthouse steps filled the screen. The video began to play. The crowd leaned forward as they watched Wheeler's hand crack violently across Olivia's face, the sharp sound captured perfectly by the mic. Gasps filled the room as her leather satchel tumbled to the marble steps, papers scattering like leaves in the wind. The words followed, brutal and undeniable. "Filthy animals like you don't belong here." The silence in the room turned heavy, suffocating, broken only by a few muffled cries from onlookers. Abigail Foster's hand flew to her mouth. Jasmine Carter's trembling fingers covered her lips, tears pooling in her eyes. Wheeler's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as panic flickered beneath his forced composure. "That video it's incomplete," he stammered weakly, his voice cracking under pressure. But Olivia didn't respond. Instead, she signaled again, and another file appeared, the body cam footage, uploaded automatically to the federal cloud moments after the incident. This time, the audio was crystal clear, Wheeler's every insult, every threat, every mocking laugh preserved forever. The malfunction he had claimed earlier didn't exist. The truth was here, playing out in real time before the court. "Officer Wheeler," Olivia said softly, her tone steady but sharp. "You swore under oath that you acted lawfully, that I resisted, that your body cam malfunctioned." She paused deliberately, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The evidence disagrees." Wheeler's breathing grew shallow, his confident facade collapsing piece by piece. Cole shifted uncomfortably in his seat, beads of sweat rolling down his temple. Holt stared down at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. Olivia leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering but carrying even more force. "Perjury," she said calmly. "Assault, civil rights violations, abuse of authority, all captured, all preserved, all undeniable." A stunned hush blanketed the room. Then, slowly, the murmurs began. Low at first, then growing, the gallery buzzing with disbelief and outrage. Reporters in the back scrambled for their phones, whispering updates furiously into microphones. Abigail Foster looked pale, the weight of her misplaced trust hitting her like a tidal wave. Jasmine Carter sat frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her eyes locked on Olivia with awe. Olivia raised her gavel slightly, bringing the chaos back under control with a single sharp strike. "Order in this court," she commanded, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. The silence returned instantly, tense and electric. Wheeler opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was trapped, caught between his lies and the reality playing out in front of him. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. "Officer Wheeler," she said slowly, her voice deliberate and final. "Your testimony has been proven false, your conduct unlawful, and your actions today disgraceful." She gestured toward the officers seated beside him. "Officers Cole and Holt, I strongly suggest you reconsider your testimonies while you still can." Cole's lips parted, his eyes darting nervously around the room, and finally he cracked. I just followed his lead," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Holt nodded stiffly, tears brimming in her eyes as she stared at her lap. Wheeler turned toward them, betrayal flashing across his face, but Olivia didn't give him time to speak. "This court will reconvene shortly," she announced, her voice unshaken, her authority absolute. "Until then, Officer Wheeler, you are ordered to remain in custody pending further investigation." The bailiff moved quickly, stepping behind Wheeler, whose hands twitched slightly at his sides as if resisting the urge to react. The crowd erupted again, phones raised, whispers flying, the entire courtroom alive with shock and disbelief. Olivia sat back slightly, her hands resting on the polished surface of the bench, her expression composed but her heart pounding beneath the robe. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person Wheeler had humiliated, every life he had damaged, every complaint buried under bureaucracy. As the gallery slowly emptied for the second recess, Jasmine Carter lingered near the clerk's desk, her young face flushed with emotion. She met Olivia's gaze from across the room, a silent promise passing between them. This wasn't over. It had only begun, and when the court reconvened, the full weight of justice would fall. When the courtroom doors reopened, the energy inside was electric, thick with anticipation and disbelief. Reporters whispered furiously into phones. Flashes from cameras lit up the back rows, and every seat in the gallery was taken, the air heavy with tension as Judge Olivia Grant returned to the bench. This time there was no confusion, no doubt, no hesitation. Everyone in the room knew exactly who she was. Her presence radiated authority, her black robes flowing like armor, the polished mahogany gavel resting within reach. The bailiff called the court back to order, his voice steady despite the chaos outside, and the murmurs faded into silence. Olivia lifted a thick folder from her bench, her fingertips brushing the worn edges of the paper, and her voice came slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of 22 years on the federal bench. "Before we proceed," she began, her gaze locking directly onto Officer Nathan Wheeler. "This court has reviewed the preliminary findings from the Department of Justice regarding your service record." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery, but Olivia's raised hand brought instant silence. "Officer Wheeler," she continued, her tone calm but edged with steel. "You currently have 62 citizen complaints filed against you during your 17 years on the force. Of those 62, 48 involve allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and unlawful detainment, overwhelmingly targeting people of color." Wheeler's lips parted as though to respond, but no sound came out. Cole shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Holt stared down at the table, her knuckles white as she clutched her notes. Olivia pressed on, her voice unwavering. "Out of the 1,392 arrests you've made, 81% involved non-white individuals, despite Philadelphia's demographic makeup being 44% black. Statistical anomalies like this do not happen by coincidence. Officer Wheeler." She placed several documents on the overhead projector, the numbers and charts appearing on the courtroom screen for all to see. Audible gasps rippled through the gallery as the statistics told a story of patterns too obvious to ignore. "Let us review some of the cases," Olivia said, sliding open another folder. "Case number 1, Mrs. Dorothy Evans, age 68, stopped for a broken taillight and hospitalized after you fractured her wrist during what should have been a routine traffic stop." Olivia's voice remained composed, but her words carried a quiet fury that made every syllable hit like a hammer. "Case number 12, Jamal Hayes, 16 years old, wrongfully accused of theft at a downtown electronics store. Video evidence later cleared him entirely, and yet you had him handcuffed on the sidewalk for 47 minutes, surrounded by jeering bystanders. A woman in the gallery, small and frail with silver hair, let out a muffled sob at the mention of Dorothy Evans' name. Beside her, a young man clenched his fists, his jaw tight, his eyes wet. Olivia continued, her cadence steady, her tone unrelenting. "Case number 29, Dr. Caleb Turner, an emergency room physician, detained outside his own home because, as you claimed, he didn't look like he belonged in that neighborhood. He was arrested in front of his 6-year-old daughter. Charges were dismissed, but the damage remains." Abigail Foster, the prosecutor, shifted uneasily at her table, her earlier confidence dissolving with every name, every statistic, every documented abuse Olivia laid bare. She began flipping through her own notes, realization dawning in her expression as she glanced between the evidence and the man she had been defending moments earlier. Jasmine Carter, seated at her clerk's desk, typed rapidly, her wide eyes flicking up at Olivia with awe between keystrokes. Every fact was being recorded, every word preserved. This wasn't just a courtroom hearing anymore. It was history unfolding. Wheeler's defense attorney, Ethan Blake, stood suddenly, his voice strained, desperate to salvage what little ground he had left. "Your Honor, these incidents are unrelated and prejudicial to this case," he argued, his tone thin, unconvincing. Olivia turned her gaze toward him, her expression measured, her voice steady but unyielding. "Counselor, this is not character evidence. This is pattern evidence. This court has an obligation to examine the systemic abuse tied directly to today's allegations. The people deserve the full truth." Ethan hesitated, his shoulders sagging as he lowered himself back into his seat, conceding the inevitable. Wheeler's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as his hands gripped the edge of the defense table. His breathing was shallow now, his forehead damp with sweat. His earlier bravado shattered under the crushing weight of the evidence piling against him. Olivia leaned slightly forward, her gaze locked on him with unflinching intensity. "Officer Wheeler," she said, her voice dropping into a low, deliberate register. This is not just about one slap, one insult, one wrongful arrest. This is about a pattern of behavior so pervasive, so deliberate, that it can no longer be ignored. 62 complaints, 48 involving people of color, 612 dismissed cases tied directly to your arrests. This court will not turn away from the truth. Murmurs surged through the gallery again, louder this time. Several people rising halfway from their seats in disbelief. Olivia struck her gavel once, restoring order with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder through the chamber. "Order!" she commanded, her voice carrying authority that brooked no opposition. She turned her attention briefly to the gallery. Her words now meant for everyone listening. For too long. Misconduct has been buried beneath bureaucracy, cases dismissed quietly, complaints ignored, victims silenced. That ends here. Wheeler shifted violently in his seat, leaning toward his attorney as if to speak, but Olivia cut him off before he could form a word. "And let me be very clear," she said, her voice steady, controlled, deliberate. "This is no longer just a courtroom matter. Effective immediately. This case will be referred to the Department of Justice for a full federal investigation." Gasps rippled through the gallery, louder than before, reporters scrambling to capture every second of the unfolding drama. Abigail Foster lowered her pen slowly, her face pale, her earlier allegiance visibly shaken. For the first time. She looked at Wheeler not as an officer but as an accused perpetrator standing at the center of an unraveling scandal. Olivia's gaze swept across the room, resting briefly on Jasmine Carter, whose expression had transformed from quiet awe to steely determination. Jasmine was typing furiously, her words documenting every blow as the narrative shifted from defense to accountability. Olivia closed the folder gently but firmly, placing both hands on the bench as she addressed Wheeler one final time. "Officer Wheeler, the evidence against you is overwhelming. This court has no choice but to order your immediate suspension from duty. Pending the outcome of this investigation, you will surrender your badge and firearm to the bailiff before leaving this courtroom." Marcus Tate stepped forward, his face impassive, extending a hand as Wheeler hesitated, his breathing ragged, his gaze darting desperately between Cole and Holt. Neither of them met his eyes. Cole looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, while Holt sat rigid, her eyes glassy, unable to hide her guilt. Wheeler's lips trembled as if he wanted to protest, but no words came. He slowly unclipped his badge, placing it in Marcus's palm, the metallic clink ringing through the silent courtroom like the tolling of a bell. Olivia's expression didn't change, her resolve didn't waver. She looked past Wheeler now, beyond him, toward something greater than this moment. The systemic reform this case could ignite. "This court," she said softly, her voice even and resolute, "stands for the people, and the people deserve justice." The gavel came down with a sharp, decisive strike, its sound reverberating through the chamber, carrying a promise that the reckoning had only just begun. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere inside the Philadelphia Federal Courthouse was unlike anything the city had seen in decades. The gallery was packed wall to wall, every seat filled, reporters lined up along the back with cameras ready, their lenses aimed at the bench where Judge Olivia Grant now sat in her flowing black robes, her polished gavel resting firmly on the oak surface before her. The tension was suffocating, the silence sharp enough to cut, every heartbeat in the room sinking with the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Olivia scanned the courtroom slowly, her gaze moving from Wheeler to the prosecutor, to the gallery filled with victims and families whose lives had been scarred by years of abuse and misconduct. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, deliberate, each word carrying the full weight of her authority. "This court has reviewed the evidence," she began, her tone controlled, unwavering. "We have examined sworn testimony, body cam footage, courthouse surveillance, and verified federal records. Officer Nathan Wheeler, this court finds you guilty of felony assault, assault on a judicial officer, civil rights deprivation, abuse of authority, and perjury under oath. The words landed like thunder, rolling through the chamber with devastating force. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Some clapped a hand over their mouths. Others whispered in disbelief, their voices trembling. Jasmine Carter, seated at her clerk's desk, froze mid-keystroke. Her eyes locked on Olivia in awe. Abigail Foster, the prosecutor who only hours earlier had relied on Wheeler's testimony, stared at her notes, her pen falling silently from her fingers. Wheeler sat motionless at the defense table, his once defiant posture crumbling as Olivia's words pressed down like a storm he couldn't escape. His defense attorney, Ethan Blake, placed a hand on his client's shoulder, whispering frantically. But Wheeler barely heard him, his mind spinning, his breath shallow, his eyes unfocused. Olivia didn't stop. She leaned forward slightly, her voice measured, precise, cutting through the tension like a blade. The actions of this officer were not isolated. They were part of a deliberate and consistent pattern of abuse spanning 17 years. This court cannot, and will not, allow this level of misconduct to be ignored any longer. Officer Wheeler, you have dishonored your badge, violated your oath, and abused the public trust. For that, there are consequences. She paused, letting the silence stretch until the weight of her words settled fully across the room. It is the judgment of this court that you are hereby sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by a stunned hush. Some cried quietly, others nodded, tears streaming freely, their faces etched with both pain and relief. A woman in the second row clutched her chest, whispering, "Finally, finally," as if the words carried the weight of years of waiting for justice. Wheeler shook his head slowly, his lips trembling, his body sagging forward as the reality of the sentence crashed into him like a tidal wave. 30 years? He whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking. Olivia's gaze remained fixed on him, unwavering, unflinching. "Yes, Officer Wheeler," she said firmly, her tone both final and resolute. 30 years. His breathing quickened, panic flashing across his face as his carefully constructed world collapsed around him. Cole and Holt sat behind him, both pale and silent, avoiding his gaze entirely. Holt dabbed at her eyes with a trembling hand while Cole hunched over, his shoulders heavy with guilt. Olivia struck her gavel once, the sharp crack echoing through the chamber, pulling the room back from the edge of chaos. "Order in this court," she commanded, and the noise subsided instantly. She turned her attention to the clerk's desk. "This court orders the Department of Justice to immediately conduct a comprehensive review of every arrest, every detainment, and every use of force report filed by Officer Wheeler throughout his career." She looked back toward the gallery, her voice ringing out clear and powerful. "Over 600 cases tied to this officer will be reopened. Every wrongful charge will be dismissed. Every victim will have their name cleared." At that, a low murmur of relief swept through the rows, voices breaking with emotion. Dorothy Evans, frail and gray-haired, held her daughter's hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Beside her, Jamal Hayes, now 17, sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on Wheeler with a mix of anger and quiet vindication. "Dr." Caleb Turner exhaled deeply, closing his eyes as though releasing years of unspoken pain. Olivia took a deep breath, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its strength. "To the victims sitting here today, this is not the end. This is the beginning of accountability. You were failed by the system designed to protect you. But today, this court acknowledges your pain and your courage." Her words drew quiet sobs from several in the gallery, Jasmine wiping her eyes discreetly as she typed the transcript. Abigail Foster leaned back in her chair, her earlier composure gone, replaced by visible shame. She glanced briefly at Olivia, her lips parting as though to speak, but no words came. Olivia continued, her voice rising slightly, filling every corner of the chamber with controlled power. This court further orders the Philadelphia Police Department to undergo an independent federal audit into its policies, procedures, and complaint handling mechanisms, effective immediately. This court is appointing an oversight committee led by the Department of Justice to implement mandatory reforms. The announcement landed heavily, reporters furiously scribbling notes as the scale of what was unfolding became clear. This wasn't just a sentencing, this was the first strike in dismantling systemic corruption within the department itself. Wheeler sat hollow-eyed, staring blankly at the table, his hands shaking slightly as he struggled to comprehend the unraveling of his power, his career, his life. The man who once wielded authority over others now sat stripped of it entirely. Olivia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before speaking one final time. "No one," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence like glass, "is above the law. Not even those entrusted to enforce it." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Marcus Tate stepped forward from his position by the bench, flanked by two federal marshals, and approached Wheeler slowly. His hand extended, badge and weapon, Marcus said firmly. Wheeler hesitated, his hand trembling as he unclipped his badge, placing it gently in Marcus's palm, the metallic click echoing through the chamber like the closing of a door on his past life. His service pistol followed, heavy and cold, surrendered without resistance. As Marcus stepped back, Wheeler slumped in his seat, his body shaking, his eyes glassy as tears pooled silently and rolled down his cheeks. For 17 years, he had believed himself untouchable. But today, the illusion shattered. Olivia lowered her gaze for a brief moment, gathering herself before striking her gavel a final time. The sharp, commanding crack reverberated through the chamber, carrying the weight of justice finally delivered. "Court is adjourned," she declared, her voice steady, unbroken, in the gallery. Silence gave way to quiet murmurs, the emotional release palpable as people clutched one another, some crying openly, others simply staring at Olivia in awe. Reporters rushed out into the hallway to break the news, their voices already echoing across live broadcasts, the headlines writing themselves in real time, in that single moment. Olivia Grant wasn't just a judge, she was a symbol of resilience, a symbol of change, a symbol of what justice should truly look like. But deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. 8 months later, the Philadelphia Federal Courthouse looked the same on the outside. Towering marble columns, bronze doors polished to a soft shine, the same steps where everything began. But inside, everything had changed. The city had been transformed by the ripple effects of one moment, one courtroom, one judge who refused to stay silent. The Department of Justice's full investigation had concluded, and its findings shook the city to its core. 19 officers, including senior supervisors, were terminated for misconduct. 7 were federally indicted on charges ranging from obstruction of justice to civil rights violations. Over 600 cases tied to Officer Nathan Wheeler's arrests were reopened, and 342 wrongful convictions were overturned, for families who had carried pain and shame for years. Vindication had finally come. The city approved a $14.8 million settlement fund to compensate victims, the largest of its kind in Philadelphia's history. New federal oversight committees were established to monitor complaint handling and use of force reports. The Philadelphia Police Department, once resistant to change, had begun mandatory cultural sensitivity and de-escalation training under federal supervision. Every officer now wore upgraded body cams with live streaming capabilities, permanently connected to a secure DOJ cloud. For the first time in decades, community trust began to rebuild. Inside the courthouse, Jasmine Carter walked briskly through the marble halls, her DOJ credentials clipped to her blazer, inspired by Olivia's courage. She had left her clerkship to join the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, working on cases to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She paused briefly outside a newly mounted plaque near the grand stairway, her fingers brushing across the engraved words, "The Grant Justice Center, named in honor of Judge Olivia T. Grant, for her unwavering dedication to truth, justice, and equality." Jasmine smiled softly, pride swelling in her chest, before continuing toward the conference room where Olivia was preparing for a nationally televised press briefing. Across the city, Olivia's face had become synonymous with courage and accountability. Invitations poured in from universities, advocacy groups, and congressional committees. She had testified twice before the Senate Judiciary Committee, her insights shaping new federal policies aimed at dismantling systemic abuse within law enforcement. Her speech at Howard University, streamed live to over 6 million viewers, was called "A New Blueprint for Justice" by national headlines, yet despite her rising influence, Olivia remained grounded. She still walked the courthouse halls daily, still handled cases, still listened to every victim with the same patience she had carried since her first day on the bench. To her, this was never about fame. It was about people. It was about restoring trust where it had been broken. And yet, Olivia's personal journey had been anything but easy. The nightmares still came sometimes. The slap on the courthouse steps, the humiliation of sitting cuffed at the defendant's table, the echoes of Wheeler's words burning into her memory. But every time those memories surfaced, she reminded herself why she fought: for her father, profiled in the 80s, for her nephew, arrested at 14, for every Dorothy Evans, every Jamal Hayes, every Dr. Caleb Turner whose dignity had been stripped away by unchecked power. That fight gave her strength, it gave her purpose, and it gave her hope that what happened here could change far more than one city. Meanwhile, deep inside a federal prison 300 miles away, Nathan Wheeler sat alone in a small concrete cell, the weight of his 30-year sentence pressing down like an unending winter. His once proud uniform was gone, replaced by a faded orange jumpsuit. The man who had once wielded authority through intimidation now woke every morning to the clang of metal doors and the echo of guards' boots on cold floors. At night, he lay awake, haunted by memories of his trial, by the faces of those he'd wronged, by the sharp sound of Olivia's gavel declaring his sentence. He replayed the footage in his mind, the slap, the words, the courtroom reveal, over and over, each time more unbearable than the last. Some days he told himself it wasn't his fault, that the system had failed him, too. But in the quiet hours, when excuses faded, he couldn't escape the truth. He had destroyed his life, and hundreds of others, with his choices. Back in Philadelphia, life moved forward. Dorothy Evans, now 70, used part of her settlement to open a free legal aid center in her neighborhood, offering help to seniors navigating police complaints and court filings. Jamal Hayes, the once terrified 16-year-old falsely accused of theft, received a full scholarship to Temple University. Dedicating his studies to criminal justice reform, Dr. Caleb Turner, whose wrongful arrest had humiliated him in front of his young daughter, launched a nonprofit organization providing mental health counseling to families traumatized by racial profiling. These were more than individual victories. They were symbols of a system beginning, at last, to repair itself. In March, a historic ceremony was held on the courthouse steps where it all began. Hundreds gathered beneath the morning sun as the mayor unveiled the new plaque renaming the building the Grant Justice Center. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded close, and Olivia stood at the podium, her black robes flowing softly in the spring breeze. She paused for a long moment, scanning the crowd, the victims, the students, the families, the officials, the people she served, before speaking. 8 months ago, she began, her voice steady and clear. I walked these same steps as I had many times before. But that morning was different. That morning, I was not seen as a judge. I was not seen as a woman with authority. I was seen only as a threat. What happened here did not just happen to me. It happened to every person who has ever been silenced, dismissed, or humiliated because of who they are or what they look like. Her voice wavered slightly, just for a moment, before her resolve returned. But this is not a story about humiliation. It is a story about resilience. It is a story about truth. And it is proof that justice can still prevail, if we are willing to fight for it. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound rolling down the marble steps like waves crashing against stone. Cameras panned across the faces of Dorothy Evans, Jamal Hayes, Dr. Turner, and countless others whose lives had been reshaped by what began on those steps. In that moment, Olivia's gaze lifted toward the sky, her thoughts quiet but firm. She knew there was still work to do, still systems to reform, still voices to amplify. But this was a start. That evening, national news outlets carried the story across every screen, hashtags trending worldwide, millions sharing clips of Olivia's speech, her words sparking conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces across the country. To some, she was a hero. To others, a reformer. To many, simply hope personified in the years to come. Law schools would study her rulings. Advocacy groups would cite her case in legislation, and communities far beyond Philadelphia would replicate the oversight model born from this courtroom. But Olivia Grant didn't think of herself as a symbol. She thought of herself as a servant of the people, a guardian of their rights, and a witness to the power of truth. As the sun dipped below the courthouse columns that night, the marble glowing gold in the fading light, Olivia walked down the steps slowly, her hand brushing the new plaque bearing her name. She paused for just a moment, listening to the hum of the city around her, the voices of people laughing, talking, living freely. Then she smiled faintly, whispering the words that had guided her through every trial, every battle, every injustice she had faced. Justice is my shield, but truth will always be my sword. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, comment your location, subscribe, like, and share for more inspiring stories.